I was amazed when on my recent cruise aboard Regent Seven Seas Navigator, I found out that the ship had a mysterious and very murky past, and it got my mind reeling. What other ships have I been on or plan to go on that also have crazy or downright troubling pasts? I found 5 more of them, including name and even ship swapping to hide and disguise misadventures, and an incident so wild it sounds like the plot of a thriller. If you don't know me, welcome aboard. I'm Gary Bembridge. Let's start with Regent Seven Seas Navigator's previous life. Unbelievably, the ship was originally intended to be a Russian spy vessel. It started being built in 1988 at the Admiralty shipyards in St. Petersburg and was called Academic Nikolai Pilgin. It was the planned prototype for 3 planned satellite tracking ships used to track NATO submarines. The collapse of the Soviet Union in 1991 ended these plans, but the ship was pretty much completed. It was eventually bought by V-Ships and Mariachi shipyards. It was towed to Genoa and was converted from spy ship to luxury cruise ship, eventually entering service in 1999 for Radisson Seven Seas, which later became Regent Seven Seas. It's now a 480 passenger ship, one of the most luxurious in the world. But if history had gone a different way, it could have been something completely different. That crazy previous life in Soviet shipyards got me wondering if there had been other crazy stories during the construction of other ships. Let's start with the Norwegian Pride of America, which sails exclusively around the Hawaiian Islands. It has an incredible history. The ship started life as part of Project America. This was a US government program which tried rekindling the country's shipbuilding industry. In 2000, a cruise line called American Classic Voyages commissioned the vessel and construction started in a Mississippi shipyard. However, during construction, American Classic Voyages went bankrupt and the project ground to a halt with only about 40% of the Pride of America complete. Eventually, Norwegian Cruises bought the partially constructed ship and towed what was built to then Germany's Lloyd Werft shipyard to be finished. This is ironic, considering this was supposed to be the rebirth of great American shipbuilding. But the story didn't end there. The ship sank during construction in Germany. It's believed that a storm pushed water through an opening in the engine deck and filled the vessel. It sank to the bottom of the harbour, staying there for well over a month as arguments raged about who should fit the bill. Eventually, it was agreed that insurance would pay up and the ship was completed in 2005. The Pride of America is also interesting because it's the only American registered cruise ship in the world. Most ships, as you probably know, are registered with a flag of convenience. Now, this means, for better or worse, they register with a country that provides them with more favorable conditions for operation, like the Bahamas or Panama, and makes it easier to operate. However, because this ship is American registered, it must abide by US labor laws, gambling restrictions, and tax policies. So that means, for example, no duty-free shopping, no casino on board. Staff wages are much higher than on your average ship, but it's still kind of low, it's felt, in comparison to other American jobs. And because the ship must be staffed exclusively by US citizens, the ship often struggles to attract crew. However, wages also mean the ship and the cruise is much more expensive than equivalent cruises for us as passengers. Now, the crazy history of the ship is part of what makes it so unique, and that's also true of Diamond Princess. Now, many of you have probably heard of Diamond Princess for infamous reasons. In the early days of COVID, it was forced to quarantine in Yokohama, Japan in February 2020. By late March, at least 712 out of the 3,700 passengers and crew had tested positive. Sadly, 14 people actually died from the virus. Now, even before COVID, Diamond Princess had a troubled past. It was originally named the Sapphire Princess, with this sister ship called the Diamond Princess. Now, whilst under construction, the original Diamond Princess caught fire and was almost destroyed completely. The fire raged for almost a day before it was eventually put out. At the time, it was unclear whether the ship was ever going to be able to be salvaged. So what they eventually decided to do was to swap the names of the ships. So the Diamond Princess could actually be delivered on time. So actually, the Sapphire Princess is actually now the Diamond Princess, and vice versa. So while the ship's COVID trouble may be well documented, many on board may now never know about the fire-induced name change. If you're on the Diamond Princess, you're actually on what was intended to be the Sapphire Princess. Fire doesn't only affect ships when they're under construction, unfortunately. People embarking on P&O Australia's Pacific encounter may be a little bit surprised to learn that the ship had a catastrophic fire on board during its previous incarnation as the Star Princess. In March 2006, what was then the Star Princess was sailing off the coast of Jamaica with 3,813 guests. It was just before 3 a.m. in the morning that a crew member smelt burning. They couldn't see anything and so didn't think it was a fire. But shortly after that, someone in the cabin set off an alarm after they saw the glow of fire on their balcony. The fire spread right along the ship balconies and up onto other decks. At 3:20 a.m., a shipwide emergency alarm was sounded and people were asked to evacuate their cabins and go to the muster stations. The heat from the fire on the balconies was so hot that the glass doors started shattering and the fire began to spread inside some of the cabins. The fire itself raged for over an hour and a half. 297 cabins were damaged or destroyed from both fire and smoke. That's around a quarter of all the cabins on the ship. Now, it's believed that the fire was started when a discarded lit cigarette butt set alight either balcony furniture or the partitions between the balconies. It was later discovered that the partitions and balcony furniture were built from some more flammable materials, polycarbonate and polyurethane, which actually accelerated the burning. Now, the fire was only put out at 4:30 a.m. and the ship was eventually able, under its own power, to head into Montego Bay in Jamaica, where it docked, and all the passengers were evacuated from the ship. Sadly, one passenger, 72-year-old Richard Liffage from Georgia, died from smoke inhalation. 13 other passengers suffered significant smoke-related injuries. Now, as a result of the fire, rules were changed significantly to make balconies follow the same fire rules as inside of the ship, and many cruise lines have changed their balcony furniture and completely banned smoking on balconies, partly because of this risk. 12 years after the fire, the ship was transferred now to P&O Australia, Princess's sister line, and is now called the Pacific Encounter. So some passengers might not know that they're staying in a cabin that in 2006 was actually ravaged by fire. Another ship which changed names is the Carnival Sunrise. It was previously called the Carnival Triumph. That was until the Poop cruise gave the ship a rather bad reputation. Carnival Triumph left Galveston, Texas in February 2013 for a short 4-day cruise. After stopping Cozumel, a fire broke out at about 5 a.m. in the cruise's engine room, leaving the ship without any power. Most things stopped working, including the plumbing. This led to a horrific experience on board. Passengers had limited water, experienced extreme heat because there was no air conditioning, and at one point even had some human waste running down through the hallways. Some ships passing by helped provide supplies, but without power, the Triumph spent 4 days drifting in the Gulf of Mexico in these awful, awful conditions. Eventually, the ship was towed to Alabama, and those weary, exhausted passengers disembarked on February the 14th. Now, Carnival did offer each passenger some money in the form of various vouchers for future cruises, but many passengers were very unhappy, and multiple lawsuits were launched seeking millions of dollars in damage, though most actually weren't very successful at all. Now, the ship carried on as Carnival Triumph for another 6 years until it was eventually taken out of service. It had a major revamp. At the same time, the Carnival chose to ditch the troubled name, reintroducing it to the world as the Carnival Sunrise. So if you ever do go cruising on Carnival Sunrise, remember that it was once the infamous Poop cruise ship. One of the most dramatic and interesting stories, one of which could be from the pages of a best-selling thriller, is about La Ponant. Now, La Ponant is a mastered sailing ship owned by Ponant, the luxury French cruise group. It has 16 staterooms holding a maximum of 32 guests, so very exclusive. Now, on the 4th of April 2008, as La Ponant was sailing from the Seychelles through the Gulf of Aden, it was attacked and taken by Somali pirates. There were no passengers at the time, but all 30 crew members were taken hostage, 22 French, 6 Filipino, and 1 Cameroonian and 1 Ukrainian. Now, French and Canadian forces were actually in the area at the time. They actually had helicopters and Navy ships, so they monitored the yacht. But the hostages were only released 8 days later because the shipping company CMA CGM paid a 1.7 million euro ransom. But the French military did not let it rest. They tracked the pirates back to their home in Somalia and actually captured them, recovering even some of that ransom money. They brought the pirates to trial in Paris, where they were eventually convicted. 4 of the 6 pirates were sentenced to between 4 and 10 years in jail. Now, piracy has been an issue in that area for some time, and there have been unsuccessful attempts to attack a few other cruise ships over the years, but La Ponant is the only one where they successfully took the ship. The luxury on board La Ponant now might make current passengers forget the insane history of this yacht. If you found all of this interesting, watch this video where I talk about some other interesting and unusual things about cruise ships which most people aren't aware of. See you over there.